Okay, this video is about how do you crush a college class. So what this comes out of is, sometimes, parents bring me their kids to have me tutor them or teach them, and also I have other students that approach me and ask me for advice on school. So I'm going to kind of give you a quick comprehensive lecture on how you crush a class in college or in grad school. Just real quick, like for my credentials, here's a couple awards I won. I was first in my medical school class at University of Illinois. When I was in college at Stanford, I was a Stanford Student Athlete of the Year award. I got A pluses in the most difficult classes like organic chemistry for the pre-med track and the biology class for the pre-med track and stuff like that. So I just let you know, I know this game pretty well. So we're going to go through the attitude you have. And I'm going to talk a lot about personality because I think that's really important if you want to be successful. So the first thing is, do you know the prerequisites for the subject? If you're taking something that's out of your area of expertise, like let's say you're not that good at math, well then make sure you learn all the prereqs for the math, okay? Like a good way to learn the prereqs for calculus is take the SAT test again and go through all the study questions so you can do all that SAT level math. If that's something you have to do. For pre-meds, that's sort of a pain in the butt for pre-meds, having to take calculus. And so make sure you know the prereqs, okay? Take it in summer school. Take it at a junior college. You don't even have to keep the credits if you don't want to, but just get yourself dialed up. And some of the things I'm going to talk about, just basic principles. What I see with a lot of students is they go take a college class and they just show up and they hope it goes well. I don't think that's a good idea. I think you want to always have the attitude that you're going to be the best student in the class. For example, you always want to walk in the first day of class and know more than everyone else in the room. You should do whatever it takes to try to get yourself to that point. And I'm going to show you how to do it. It's actually very doable if you understand the game. Let's see, what else? You should study in the summer. You should study in your vacation. Why not? I mean, if you have strong reasons for wanting to learn, everything I'm saying is going to totally make sense. It'll often sound different than what you're used to, but that's you probably aren't used to the level of intensity that I'm used to. If you're not sure, you're ready, you don't know how to get A's, it's a little more difficult in college than it is in high school. Take a lighter load of classes the first semester until you figure it out. I think it's very important that you have a good reason clarified in your mind. Why are you taking this class? Sometimes you have to, it's required for your major. Other times, though, it's a decision. You only have so much time. You got all this tuition money you got to pay. So you want to have a good reason for everything that you do. Here's a quote by Goethe. He said, "To learn a complex topic, a man must love it." So what I'm saying by that is, get yourself into a frame of mind where you're interested in taking that class. For example, biochemistry is the most difficult class in medical school. So I was very pumped up for biochemistry. My attitude is biochemistry is the language of God, that he uses to write the book of life. I wanted to someday become a great scientist or doctor, so I feel I must learn biochemistry. And I was like the best medical student in the whole United States, not just first in my class for biochemistry when I was in medical school. I was excited about it. It was like, for me, one of the big events of the week was going to biochemistry class, because I had previously been kind of overwhelmed by the teacher and the topic, but once I sort of figured out how to approach it, I got to the point where I would read the night before and go into class, I would make a lot of it into a review, because I was well prepared for class, and that made it a lot more enjoyable. Other thing is, your goal should be more than grades. If you're just focused on grades, school can kind of seem like a chore. You should tell yourself, I am here to really learn the material. Someday I want to be a great scientist or doctor or whatever field it is that you're in, because when you think that way, your brain is programmed to remember what is important to you. We have a long-term memory. We remember what we learned in driver's ed because we wanted to learn how to drive. We remember those conversations with our friends about dating the other sex because we wanted to learn how to talk to them. So what I'm saying is, if you tell yourself, I really want to learn this material because I really want to someday be a great scientist, doctor, whatever it is. So, for example, I also try to have friends who are interested in what you're interested in. I had a friend who was very interested in biology. We both thought we were going to potentially be wildlife biologists, and so that made us very enthusiastic to go bird watching in the woods. And, I tell the story that, I went out to the Palo Alto Baylands, the marshes there with all the waterfowl and whatnot, and I was bird watching out there. And I go up to the nature center. I'm like, can I please see your field guide? They go, we don't have a field guide. I'm like, what do you mean you don't have a field guide? So even though I was super busy as a student athlete, I went and wrote my own field guide for the Palo Alto Baylands. And the other thing I would tell you is a lot of people say to me now, oh, you're just smart. Some people are just smart. You're lucky you were smart. And I would say that's BS, because when I was in high school, I wasn't even an honor student. I didn't take any honors classes. I didn't even know what an AP class was. Both of my parents were from other countries. They didn't know anything about the United States. My mind's eye view of myself is I was an athlete. Up until I got injured, I always thought I was going to be, a wrestling coach for the rest of my life. And I figured, I had the talent to be a national champion, even an Olympic champion. So that was my mind's eye view of the future. I didn't really care about school. It was just a hassle. I tried to get decent grades so my parents don't bug me. I can go out on the weekends, okay? But I was not a focused student at all. And lots of people, nobody from my high school would have ever thought that I would end up being the best student to come out of there. I say that because academics is not that much. It's not as much how smart you are as it is all these other things. And I can assure you, the most important thing for most people to develop is learn study skills, memorization techniques, and develop what I would call a force of personality. Because that intensity of purpose, it really drives you to higher levels of success. And after I got injured at wrestling, I was so upset about it. I used to cry in my room, just crying that I was injured, because I kept coming back too soon, getting re-injured, and basically my athletic career kind of went downhill. I still ended up being student athlete of the year at Stanford University, set the all-time record for most wins in a season at 39, but I was no longer like I used to be, just a dominant individual in the sport. And I was so angry about that, because like I said, when I was alone, I would cry by myself, and I sort of made a vow, I am not going to let myself, I felt like I had screwed up in wrestling, that I'd been stupid for coming back too soon, and I was so angry at myself. I didn't even like myself. I was so angry at myself that I said, I am not going to allow myself to screw up in wrestling. I just screw up in academics. If I will keep studying until I drop out of my chair from exhaustion. I will push myself to the last red blood cell in my body. So I had that attitude. It's always okay to do more work. I will always work harder, because I wasn't going to let myself fail unless I just couldn't do it. And I think that was pretty important too. And I had a conversation on the phone with my mom. I was all sad about being injured in wrestling, because I got injured again. The coach is considering taking my scholarship away from me. So I was not happy about all that stuff. And my mother would say to me, oh, Peter, God doesn't want you to be a wrestler. He wants you to be a great doctor or scientist. You're going to be a great doctor or scientist. I'm like, okay, Mom, I'll go with that. And having that sense of purpose helped me to kind of get through my sadness, because I was ready to drop out of college at Stanford my freshman year when I was injured, And my girlfriend calls me up, well, she wants to go to the dance with some other guys. I'm like, oh, what the hell is this? Does my life suck? Okay, so anyways, you're going to have these low points. And what I'm saying is, if you have a strong sense of purpose, you can bounce back from all these low points, because you're going to have them. Everybody does, okay? Having faith in God or religion, all that stuff helps too. Okay, so this is also called the Alfred Adler inferiority principle, whereby a person feels like a failure and inferior in some aspect of their life, and they compensate by putting more effort into something else. The Alfred Adler inferiority principle. So for me, I felt like I had failed at wrestling because, like a dummy, I kept coming back too soon and getting re-injured, and so I said, well, I'm not going to fail in academics to make up for that. And I sort of had this idea that, like, when I was in high school, I was real popular, lots of friends, life was great, wonderful family, wonderful girlfriends, everything was as good as it could be. And so then when I went to Stanford, I was far, far away from home. I didn't know a single person. I was all alone. There were no social events. A weekend was just more time to study. And that's how it was. It was kind of miserable and lonely. And I didn't like being alone. I didn't like being lonely. But on the other hand, the advantage of being lonely is that you got more time to study. Okay? And then there's also something called the De Bronki theory, a Polish psychologist or psychiatrist theory of personality disintegration and reintegration, whereby we almost have to give up a previous part of ourselves. For me, it was, my whole wrestling social network and friend network of being at home, or my high school was, versus now going off and being entirely alone. And then you sort of reintegrate yourself, and I sort of reintegrated myself, if you will, out of becoming a scholar. I even said to my mom on the phone, I'm going to be like a learning machine. And I remember, after that conversation with my mother, I walked out to the balcony of my freshman dorm, and I saw all this vomit on the ground. All these kids had kind of grown up in sort of maybe sheltered environments in high school and didn't drink that much, and so they were getting drunk and vomiting on the sidewalks. And I was like, good. All you Stanford kids, you're smarter than me, you're better prepared than me, but while you're goofing off, getting drunk and stupid, I'm going to be studying. I'm going to catch you. I sort of had this determination. Let's see, what else? You should be studying during the summer. You should be studying during the vacation. You want to catch up with everyone else. You want to give yourself an advantage. Again, you want to show up to that first day of the class knowing more than anyone else in the room. That should be a goal. And you always want to give yourself an advantage. You know, so I would say to myself, why shouldn't I be first in the class? Why should anyone else be better than me? I should be the best student. I'm going to be the best doctor. I'm going to be the best scientist. Like, I kind of had this very competitive wrestling mentality. I didn't really feel myself competing with the kids in my class. They were sort of irrelevant. I had this idea, I'm going to be competing with the great scientists, the great doctors, okay? I wanted to really try to do something great. Not phony greatness, kissing people's asses and getting your name on papers. I wanted to really do or be something or someone great someday. That was burned into my mind. You know, I'm hanging out with these guys. You know, my wrestling coaches, Mark and Dave Schultz, are world and Olympic champion, and here I am trying to come back from an injury, and the coach is thinking of taking my scholarship away. So I was low man on the totem pole, and I'm like, someday I'm going to be great like the Schultz brothers. You know, probably as a biologist or a scientist or a doctor or something, but someday I'm going to become great. Okay, approach to class. You always want to go to class, every single class, because if you don't go to class, you start slipping back. You know, sometimes there'll be a quiz, you'll miss the quiz. Sometimes there'll be a handout, there'll be advice for the test. So you always want to find that information. The other thing is find out if there's a kid that took the class ahead of you, because they can tell you lots of useful information. You know, what are the ins and outs of the class? Are there two teachers who teach it? Which one's the better teacher to take it for? Which one will you probably get along with better? Like if you're taking a writing class, it's important that you at least think in some way similar to the teacher, you know. I took my first writing class, and the guy was like a weird guy. The class was something called like the literature of alienation. I'm like, what the hell is this? I didn't get to choose it. I was a freshman. It was my first semester. I had to take that class, and I didn't know any better. But you know, the guy was just kind of a weird guy. I had nothing in common with him, so he'd like give me a B on every paper. Okay, then I took it the second semester, and I took it with this guy who was also a physicist and very logical and scientific. And me and him just, you know, became friends. It just was kind of like automatic, and we kind of thought the same. So I would get an A on every paper. Okay, I still really didn't know how to write too well, but at least I thought the same way that he did, and he was a pretty reasonable guy. Always sit in the front row, and I used to think of myself as being like a goalie, especially for biochemistry. I would be psyched up. It was like a big event to go to class, and I would sit right in the front row. I'd plant myself right in front of that teacher, and I'd have an idea in my mind's eye. You know, I was also trying to psych myself up because I was kind of intimidated by these PhD professors at first. And I'd kind of be like, you know, you're an old man, you're the past, I'm the future, you're not going to get anything by me. And I would try to like be ready by reading so much the night before in biochemistry. I'd spend hours. I'd go through all my different books. I'd try to ask myself, what's the irreducible minimum from which all this biochemistry can be derived? You know, come up with a mnemonic for glycolysis, like where does the phosphate go to? So I showed up ready to go for class. That was a big deal to me. And again, I was trying to catch everything the teacher said, so like make it till I could get to the point where nothing would get past me. Because anybody who's been in biochemistry class knows you can be overwhelmed pretty fast and only get about 10 or 15% of the material, and the rest you're all struggling to take notes and then having to go learn it all on your own later. Nowadays, it's you get kids are much better off in the sense they can watch internet videos of, let's say, glycolysis pathway before they go in for the actual lecture for their class. But I got to the point where I could usually get about 80-90% of the biochem lecture just right there and had perfect notes because I sort of knew it pretty well before I walked into that room. Always take detailed notes, and then when you later on that night or the next day, you'll still hear the teacher's voice in your mind, fill in the gaps of anything you didn't quite get down on paper. By having studied the night before, you now know the vocabulary, you know all the abbreviations. Knowing the abbreviations enables you to keep up better with your notes in class. And also, like when I went with my friend, when we were taking biology together, we would go out to the woods bird watching. He had a friend who was a naturalist older than us, like a biology professor, and he would talk to us and teach us all about, you know, the nature and the ecology. And I really liked that. So, you know, we knew all the stories about nature. So when I would hear lectures on population biology, I knew the scientists who were doing it. I knew from the conversations with this professor who such and such a professor was, such and such a professor was, what their research had shown, what were the contradictions, what were the current controversies in the field. So that's kind of like how you want it to be. You want to be in the game. And so biology wasn't just a class that I hoped to get a good grade in. I was going to become a biologist in my mind's eye. That's what I thought at that time. So that made me want to remember everything. Okay, I could remember being out in the woods bird watching, talking with the professor naturalist about something. So then when I heard that same thing in class, that resonated with me and it stuck in my memory pretty well. Other things too about being a good student is you want to get over this idea that the teacher's going to help you. What I mean by that is I didn't really care too much who the teacher was. I would like it if I had a good teacher. I loved it when I had a good teacher. My father even told me, I told my dad how great, for example, when I was in med school, my pathology teacher was. I still remember the guy, Dr. Kirschenbaum. He was brilliant, okay? And I said, Dad, this guy's such a great professor. My dad said, you're going to remember that professor the rest of your life. I go, yeah, right, Dad. There's going to be lots of good professors. It's not a big deal. My dad goes, no. There's not that many great professors. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is, you can't expect the teacher to teach you because some teachers don't teach well. They can't teach well. You can't understand them. They're apathetic. They're ignorant. Whatever. You have to be prepared to teach yourself. Ideally, take it with the best teacher and have them teach you, but a lot of times they're just not going to. You can't expect the book to be good. A lot of time, the book they have stinks. That's why you want to talk to an older student, find out if there's a better book. Spend time at the library, going through all the different books. Spend time at the bookstore. If there's an academic bookstore at your school, going through all the books to figure out what's the best book. And often I would have multiple books for the same subject, and I would kind of go through them and try to make sense out of the subject. You can also go to a used bookstore and buy old versions of the textbooks. Very little has changed. For example, you want to look up glycolysis. You know, the old books from when I was in college, in the 1980s, they're pretty much the same as they are today. So a lot of things don't change that much. Okay, so what I'm saying is expect to teach yourself. It's wonderful when someone else can teach you and really help you, but what I'm trying to say is I was going to make it no matter what. It didn't matter how bad the teacher was, and just having that attitude, I must be successful. You know, it's almost like Cortez, burn the boats, man. We're going to do this, all right? You must teach yourself. School's a memorization contest. When you understand that, then it's a lot easier to get better. What you're being challenged to do is just memorize a bunch of material, okay? And then on your test, you're going to be tested on whether or not you've memorized that material. So you want to be good at memorization. You want to have all the memorization techniques you can. I studied all the memory contest champions. You know, and also just at Stanford, like the average pre-med's like 99.9 percentile academically, okay? So if you're doing 99 percentile work, you're really probably not doing good enough work, okay? You have to be higher up there. And if you think about it, here's how I think about it. Like an athlete, okay? If you want to start on the varsity team at a big high school, you got to be about 99th percentile in your sport, all right? If you want to start at a junior college on their team, you got to be about 99.9 percentile. If you want to be a varsity starter on a big Division I school like Stanford was at that time, then you better be 99.99 percentile athletically, or you're not going to start on a varsity Division I good team. Okay, it's just not going to happen, all right? So when you start thinking that way, then you start realizing, well, I really need to get my act together to be able to function effectively in that competitive of an environment, okay? And so again, school's memorization contest, have methods of memorization. I'll talk about some additional study skills in a moment, but okay, what else? You're going to be busy, so you need to have good time management skills. Just take a piece of paper, write out every 30-minute interval, and make sure you're using your time wisely for all those intervals. No wasted time. You should not be watching TV. TV is for low IQ people. It's just to brainwash low IQ people. You should never watch TV again in your life. There's so much more content of better quality and interest on the internet. There's really no excuse for watching a TV. You shouldn't even have one in your house. Okay, it's just for morons. All right, no TV, no alcohol. You should never have another sip of alcohol, okay? Alcohol, why would you want to poison your brain? It's for chumps, okay? You have to learn to sort of think this way, okay? Don't do anything with head trauma, okay? You know, some guys want to do MMA. Well, if you're doing anything where you're getting head trauma, that's going to lower your IQ, all right? Eat a healthy diet. You know, you don't want to be drinking water with F- in it. That has a tendency over time to lower IQ. Especially in you know, babies and stuff, because they don't have an intact blood-brain barrier. But even when you're an adult, you still have areas in the blood-brain barrier where it's not fully intact. The pineal gland, the circumventricular organs, etc. So you want to try to avoid that. Things like that. No electronics in your bedroom. That just makes you stupid. Don't become addicted to your phone. Okay, don't be holding it next to your head. Don't be sleeping with it near you. If you like a girl, have a good relationship. Be nice. Get along. That's fine. But don't be just chasing random bimbos for, you know, meaningless sexual relationships and getting yourself into all kinds of craziness, okay? Now, I really didn't like being so lonely at Stanford. I actually didn't have a girlfriend for 4 years, okay? That's how bad it was. I was with my old high school girlfriend the first year, But that's how bad it was. So I went from being a real popular guy to like being a lonely guy. Okay, and then I went to med school in a bad neighborhood. Most med schools are in cities and they're in bad neighborhoods. There were zero social events. There was almost zero social events at Stanford. It was unbelievable how bad it was. It was unbelievable how ugly the girls were too. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. And there was such a shortage of girls that it was like I had this one girl my sophomore, I think I was a junior or something, and I was a pretty successful guy. I would be in the newspaper for, winning victories for the team and all this type of stuff. And I thought economics was a joke at that time. So this one girl, I thought economics was such a joke. It was taught by Michael Boskin. He was like the big shot economic advisor, famous economic advisor. But man, he was a lightweight of a teacher. And he would just, supply and demand. I thought economics was so painfully boring that I knew I could get an A without ever having to go to the class. Plus, I was used to competing with all the pre-meds who were hot to trot and really smart and competitive. The economics majors were kind of a joke in comparison. Okay, so anyways, what I'm trying to say is I made a deal with this girl. She goes to class, brings me to homework. I'll teach her how to do the homework, and then she brings my stuff back to class, okay? So I didn't even go to my economics class, okay? Because I knew by then I was a pretty dominant student. I was getting A+s in the pre-med classes. This econ class was just a joke. All right, so anyways, I tell you this because at the end of the semester, this was a girl who, like, not in a million years would ever have had a chance to go out with me in high school. But at Stanford, everything is reversed. Like, if you have a daughter and you don't think you can find a husband for her, send her a place like Stanford, okay? It'll be easy for her. So anyways, I asked her out after the whole semester was over, everything was done, and she real politely, like, laughed in my face, and I'm like, God, how low I have sunk socially. And it was bad. It was real bad, but it taught me a lesson in life. I learned a lot more about being humble and being nice. I hated it, and it was like that all through college, and it was pretty much like that almost entirely through med school. A few little exceptions, but not much. It was bad socially. I never planned social because in high school I sort of like took it for granted. Social's always there. You don't have to think about it in high school. You just go to a party. There's all kinds of nice people. You chat, and if you like somebody, you go out with a girl. Fine, okay, it's simple. But it's not like that in college or med school. So be that as it may, why am I going through all that? I'm trying to teach you to just get used to the fact you might have to be alone for a couple years, okay? And it's not fun, but it's just how it is. And being alone, even though it's kind of lonely and not fun, I think it actually helps you as a student because there's nothing else to do except study on the weekends, okay? Again, good to have a smart friend. You can talk about your class, help each other. Okay, study methods. You want to have a quiet study area. You also want to have ear protectors. A lot of times your family, your dorm, or the other people around you, they're going to be making noise. So you want these ear protectors because you can't turn your ears off. And that noise, you have only so much bandwidth of brain power. And if you have wasted noise distracting you coming in, that's going to make you weaker. I'll just show you real quick a couple of books I wrote. Here's Straight A's at Stanford and on to Harvard. This was a book. This is kind of an intense book. There's a shorter version, the student version. That one's better for most people. I'll give you examples of note-taking tricks here. This right here is a book of Spanish music translations. And so what I would do is I would translate all the songs into English, or I would just copy the translation off the internet. And the reason for this was a lot of fun. Basically, if you take a Spanish class and you just try to get a grade with the grammar, you'll forget everything, you won't learn everything, and you'll be just like all the other kids. In the end, you won't know anything. But if you enjoy reading Spanish books, trying to really learn the language, converse with somebody, learn all the songs, then it's very enjoyable and it lasts longer. And I would also have condensed notebooks like this. For example, when I would study a subject, I would make condensed notes like this. This is kind of like where I was at in college. I'd have condensed notes, and I would just review my condensed notes at the end of the semester before the tests, and that would work pretty well. Okay, I'm going to start showing you, though, some more powerful stuff. I'm now going to show you the book I used for my diagnostic radiology residency. I did a diagnostic radiology residency at Northwestern. I did a surgical internship. I knew I was going to be an imaging-guided surgeon, but I had to go through diagnostic radiology residency, which included interventional radiology, imaging-guided surgery. Okay, and I knew I was kind of pissed off I was at Northwestern. Okay, I sort of felt Northwestern was beneath me. They had told me when I was in med school and I interviewed at Harvard, just sign your name, we'll take you, okay? But my mother had cancer. We didn't know she was going to live that long. We only thought she was going to live about a year or so. And yeah, I was closer with my mother than anybody in the whole world, so I'm going to do right by my mother. So I stayed in the Chicago area at Northwestern, and I always felt like Northwestern was kind of beneath me, and I was kind of pissed off that I was there. But I tell you that, so anyways, so my attitude was I'm definitely going to Harvard or some other really good place for my fellowship because that's where I really belong. Okay, so anyways, here's the book. This is like an outline format review book. You can see I got all this tape on it because the thing was falling apart. I used this book so much. I would always have a note card. I'd have a note card that I'd carry in my pocket, something like this, and I'd always take notes every day. No other resident in the whole program did that, you know, and I was the only one. Also, only the senior residents and the attendings would sit in the front row. We used to have a view box in the radiology conference room. Right when I was the first year, I didn't care. I was sort of like, you know, I don't even belong here. I'm sitting in the first row. I said right in the first row, and I take notes. No one else in the room is taking notes. No other first year would dare to sit in the front row. So anyways, I'll show you this book, though. Because it's an outline format, it's a lot easier to find things. It has an index in the back. You always want an index in the back for a study book. And here's the index in the back of the book. And then I would put my own notes in there. I don't know if you can see my own notes are handwritten into the index. So that way I could find everything quickly. There was no internet back in those days. There was an internet, but it wasn't very good. Nobody used it. And I don't know if you can get a sense from looking at this book how many notes I had. I had tons of notes in this book. So anyways, the board's exam, here's like a typical page. The board's, and I would even put Post-its to tape in there. The board's exam was like a 4.5 hour test. I was done in an hour and 10 minutes with a perfect score. I just tell you that because that's what these approaches yield, you know, they lead to. And that's kind of what I'm trying to help you realize is there's a way to do things that make you get better results. And I also would track my mnemonics in here. All these little things in here are mnemonics for remembering different diseases or anatomical regions. And I had literally hundreds and hundreds of them. The ones I can quickly find that are numbered here will go up unto, well, here's 200 something. I know they went way beyond that. 300. I'm losing kind of track of some of them. And I don't know if I had them all numbered, but they were in the hundreds. So I got number 305 here, but I know there's more than that. So this was a separate book. And I also had a copy of the book that I kept at the hospital. I had a copy of the book that I kept at home, the one I just showed you that's all dog-eared that I actually studied from primarily. And then I had a third copy that I used for mnemonics. Okay, so that's outline format condensed notes. That's a very powerful study trick. Okay, here's one book I wrote kind of after I'd raised my own kids and done more tutoring, How to Raise IQ and Become a Genius. This is the book, like if your kid's younger and you want to help them to become smart. I kind of laughed. I gave this one doctor a copy of this book. You know, she has a smart kid, and she kind of freaked out because a lot of these doctors, you know, they're pretty smart, you know, IQ around 140 or something. But, you know, a lot of people have what I would call a materialistic worldview. You try to get good grades. If you get good grades, you can get into a good grad school, become a doctor, get a decent job, make some money, okay? They sort of think that way, whereas my thinking was very much more philosophic. And the reason I go into all that is people kind of freak out that are thinking materialistic when they encounter somebody who thinks philosophically. But the reason why I think philosophic thinking is so great is it empowers you. It moves you to a higher level. It makes you capable of a great thing. I think that's also why Christianity produces the best scientists, the best artists, the best writers, because that transcendent sense, value system, it elevates what you can achieve. It increases creativity and performance, and it energizes a person. Okay, here's another book I would show you, Rhyme, Rhetoric, and Logic, 4th edition, and this is one, and I give a bunch of videos. I made videos about all this stuff in more detail than what I'm sharing with you right at this moment, where I basically, this is like a PhD course in how to write effectively. You know, I mean, basically, if you want to be good at something, you study the people who are good at it. If you want to be funny, study comedians, okay? If you want to be a great writer, study persons who are great writers. That's how you get good at stuff. Okay, now I'll show you also, and also one thing I think I showed it to you before. I certainly talked about it before. That one book, Straight A at Stanford and on to Harvard. Where the heck is that cover? The cover picture of in the magic bathroom. Oh, here it is. So I used to tape all these pictures to the walls of my bathroom. So I would have pictures of my heroes next to the mirror, people who I wanted to be like, that would inspire me. And this is when I was just taking my neuroradiology boards. I taped all these pictures to the wall, you know, all these anatomical regions, all these disease patterns. And I was told unofficially, they're not allowed to officially tell you that I had gotten a perfect score on that as well. The instructor, after I finished my neuroradiology boards, was like, where are you from? How did you prepare for this test? Your performance was extraordinary. So here's another book. This is my head and neck anatomy book, and this is what I call illustrated condensed notes. All the pages are tabbed here, okay? And then what I did was I took this book that really wasn't that great of a book, but I taped in information from tons of different sources. For example, because there were some good pictures, let's say in the Netter Atlas of Neuroanatomy, then there were other good pictures coming from journal articles or from other books, but I wanted it all in one place. That was kind of my thought, that I want everything concentrated in one location, so when it's time to study, take the exam, I can quickly find everything. Okay, but you can see here I had all these complex anatomical regions, all the pictures of them, and then I would write in all this, detailed additional notes, and I would index this to other journal articles and stuff. So again, I could find everything, and by having those pictures in my bathroom, I had a very pictorial. I could picture everything in my head. Okay. All right. So, anyways, this is illustrated condensed notes, a valuable technique. Okay. Then I'm going to teach you what's probably the most powerful study technique of all. What that is you do your studying from your book, whatever book that is. Then you put the book down, and you just get up and you walk around. And when you walk around, you want to talk to yourself. And when I say talk to yourself, you should say to yourself, okay, what did I just study? For example, let's say you just studied glycolysis, a biochemistry pathway. You would then say to yourself, well, glucose is in the blood, then it comes into the cell, it gets phosphorylated when it comes into the cell, becomes glucose 6-phosphate, then it gets converted, isomerized into fructose 6-phosphate, then it gets phosphorylated again, phosphofructokinase, into fructose 1,6-diphosphate. The reason I'm going through all that is I'm showing you that's how you study every single subject, is you want to be able to talk about everything. You can articulate everything. The average student never does that. The average student just looks at their notes, highlights things, and they go, gee, I hope I do well on the test tomorrow. And that's not such a great thing. Just recognition of your highlighted notes, that's a low level of cognition, versus when you articulate the material on your own with no book in your hand, that's a much higher thing. You have to take all that information and reconstruct it and articulate it. And in a sense, you're practicing with the material. It's an active form of studying. You're reconstructing the material into logical, coherent sentences that you yourself make. So you've got copies that on the part of your body that hears, your ears, and your brain. And it gives you tremendous confidence, because, the student who just highlights their notes goes into the test thinking, I hope I recognize this stuff, versus the person who can articulate everything. I knew the material. I could rewrite the book, okay? So you had a lot of confidence. For example, I never ever did an all-nighter or anything like that. I wouldn't even stay up late. I knew the material. I studied every day. I'm ready for the test. So I'd go in there well-rested, confident. That's what I always did. Let's see. That was a big help. What else? Looking at these study methods. Have well-organized bookshelves. You want to have all of your study books for, let's say, for biology, for chemistry, for physics, or for whatever the classes are. They should all be grouped together on your bookshelf, and you should know exactly where everything is. If you need to move, be very careful. Guard those books with your life when you move to a new apartment or something, because otherwise, a lot of students, they lose their books or they get all disorganized or something, and then they have to start all over again with a brand new book. All these books, I put tons of notes in them. I always want to own the book and put tons of notes in them. That's why I think it's ridiculous when people tell me, oh, they just borrowing a book for the semester and they're not going to look at it again. I'm like, are you crazy? My notes in the margins are like the most valuable thing. So you want to keep track of that. And like I said, if you move, make sure you don't lose those notes. So that walking around and talking to oneself, that's called the walk and talk self-test. And then there's a question of whether or not you want to use flashcards. If you're going to use flashcards, those work best for sort of binary subjects. In college, a classic thing that they're great for is learning vocabulary with a foreign language, let's say Spanish or something, okay? Then if you want to have what is called a spaced interval repetition system. A lot of people like online flashcards, things like Anki, or what works really well is Lightner boxes. Lightner boxes just means having, I have pictures in my books, but it just means you have a couple like shoe boxes in your bathroom, for example, and you have the initial box is the beginning box. Then there's the middle boxes, and then there's the completion box. So you look at the flashcard, and if you instantaneously recognize it, that means you know it. It's deep in your subconscious mind, and you advance it to the next box. If you look at it, but you have to hesitate to answer the question on the one side, the answer is on the other side of the flashcard, then you keep it back in the beginner box. The point being is that way you spend more time with the difficult material, because it takes a long time for that to advance to the completion box. The easy stuff quickly goes to the completion box, so you don't waste much time with it. So the benefit of Lightner boxes are you spend more time with the challenging material, which is what you should be doing. I showed you my outline format condensed notes. I showed you illustrated condensed notes. I showed you how I make mnemonics. Again, I talked about walk and talk self-test. You want to do that all the time. Every time you take a study break, you do a walk and talk. Always. When you're driving, let's say you commute. When you commute in a car, do not listen to music like every other idiot, okay? And also, you want to be stuck up, okay? You want to become stuck up. And the reason I say that is being stuck up, even though some people might not like you, too bad. Your goal is not to just be mediocre and average. Your goal is to be the best you can be. And you have to have high standards for yourself. And that enables you to push yourself harder. And, I wanted to be like the best people. I wanted to be the best I can be, because all of that helps to keep you out of nonsense and BS that kind of drags you down. Okay? And you'll have weird experiences. For example, I had gone to Stanford. I was like the best student around. The best pre-med student I know is myself. Okay? So I had some setbacks. For example, there were a group of guys who asked me if I wanted to study with them for the MCATs. And I was real stuck up. I was kind of like, thanks, but no thanks. Because I sort of felt like, why should I study in this study group of pre-meds when I'm the best student? I'm just going to be the babysitter, the tutor for the group, okay? And so the reason I think it was funny was when they took the MCATs, I did well, but some of them did better on it than me. So the point I'm saying there is, if you really prepare for standardized tests, you will do better on it, okay? So that was a little bit embarrassing for me. I expected I would be the best student even if I hadn't prepared for it, because I really didn't even kind of study for it. I sort of like, I know I'm going to get into med school, were you kidding me? So, but I should have studied for that test. And I learned afterwards to really like standardized tests. The reason I would like a standardized test is if you just take a class with a teacher, the teacher might give you a bad grade because they don't like you, they don't think the same way you are, for whatever the reason. There's a lot of arbitrariness in there. Like, for example, I would do a clinical rotation and a professor would get pissed off at me because I didn't do things their way. For example, they would want me to give my lecture on some topic that they picked for me. And I found that kind of insulting. I'm like, no, quite thank you, I'll pick my own topic. So what I'm trying to say is what I liked about a standardized test is you could compete on a relatively level, fair playing field with people from everywhere else. So I actually grew to like standardized tests in that sense. There were a chance to show what I knew. Let's see. Talk about the mnemonics. We talked about the boxes. Well, I think I pretty much covered a lot of this stuff. But anyways, what I'm trying to say is by having this force of personality and this greater philosophical motivation of how I'm going to be in the future, you can really generate a lot of energy, and you're telling your brain this is important, so you're going to remember it. What else would I do before a test? Back then I didn't know this. Nowadays, knowing what I do know now, if it was only something like a 3-hour test or something, I would guzzle down 30 ounces of beet juice or something. I wouldn't eat a big meal because that'll make you sleepy, but guzzling down 32 ounces of beet juice like a pre-workout meal, that would pretty much energize me for a 3-4 hour test. A little water too, you're hydrated. I think I pretty much covered it. But what did I want to say about the med school, the one experience I had? I'll just give you a couple of quick story experiences that when I took my midterms in med school, I was very kind of confident going in. I figured, of course I'm going to be the best student in the class. Isn't it obvious? Okay. And on the midterms, I got like 10th percentile in the class. And I was so pissed off. I'm like, how did that happen? After me having such a shitty life and studying so much, I should be first in the class. This is ridiculous. What happened? I couldn't fathom what had happened. I felt like I'd been mugged or something. I was so pissed off and confused by how could that happen. So then I'm sitting in the cafeteria about a week later, and there's these two students that went to University of Illinois undergrad, and they had majored in pre-med. By the way, I had not majored in pre-med. I had majored in evolutionary biology, and I had a little bit of an idea when I was in college. There was a rivalry between my father and me. My father was a clinical medical physician, psychiatrist, internal medicine doctor, and I kind of had this idea, I'm going to be better than my father. Because my father would kind of criticize me, like I would take third place in a tournament. My dad would be like, well, why didn't you win? And I was pissed off, and I'm like, well, why didn't you let me go an extra year to college? I only went 4 years. I should have gone 5 years with a red shirt, and I would have been an All-American. I came like one match away from being an All-American or 2 matches. I was pissed off. And I was pissed off at my dad about that. So I was kind of like, I'm going to be a real scientist, not just a sellout doctor for money. I'm going to be better than you. So anyways, the reason I go through that is so I had taken all these wildlife, complex biology classes that most people couldn't care less about. And they weren't really relevant to med school. Whereas these University of Illinois state school students had taken all the stuff that we took the first year. So they're sitting there saying, what did you take senior in high school? Oh, I took anatomy, histology, physiology. So they had all the classes before. And so then I felt better because I knew the reason why I was only 10th percentile on my first set of exams was because they had all the classes before and I had none of those classes. So I knew once I realized it, I'm like, oh, I just gotta get my act together a little bit better. I'm gonna crush all this stuff pretty quick here, and I did. But that was one surprise for me. The other thing I noticed too is when it comes time you're getting close to your tests, you have to be selfish. And what I mean by that was, even when I was a medical student. I was already pretty obvious I was a great, phenomenal student, and I would do tutoring. You know, when I was a second year student, I would tutor the first years. I give them lectures. I gave lectures in the urban health program. So a lot of times I was giving lectures and stuff, you know, from a young age. And the reason I'm going through that is because I remember I had my final exams coming up when I was a second year student. And I took the exams and I did a little less well than I should have, okay? Let's say I expected to be first in the class. Maybe I was fourth in the class on something, and I was pissed off about that because I kind of took it for granted, all right? So what I said to myself is I was so busy, you know, giving all these lectures, tutoring, and doing all this other stuff. I should have been just studying for my own self. And people have that same thing. Sometimes they have a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship and they're putting too much time into that. Sometimes their parents are making them do too much work, whatever it might be, on the farm or whatever. And so what I'm saying is, when it comes time, those last couple weeks before your final exam, you want to just be studying for your final exam and focus on that and not distracted by anything else unless it's absolutely necessary, because it makes it, that time is more valuable, that last minute time before the exam. So anyways, I think I've gone through pretty much all the major issues on crushing a class, and if you incorporate some of these things in here into your academics, I think your performance will probably be improved. So anyways, good luck.